welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
But I'll hit record there. So look, again, typically what we do is, half hour of a review and leave it open for questions either during, and I encourage questions or ideas that pop into your mind during as we go through it, or at the end, questions for me or just comments that pop up, because I would imagine with the book I'm going to kind of go through, if you haven't read it, you'll have read stuff similar, and you might have some questions, and that's the beauty of it. Again, if you think of something or an idea or something you've read as I'm going through it, feel free to just share that. And as Declan said, if you leave it one or two new ideas, that's always good. And I think a couple of people said they like non-fiction, or they want to learn about books that they typically wouldn't. I'd say so far nearly everything we've done is non-fiction. Maybe John might have done one fiction, I think. And again, it's a lot about self-development. I'm not going to say self-help, but self-improvement, I suppose, is probably a better word. Tonight, the book I'm going to go with is called The Happiness Advantage by Shawn Achor. Has anyone read this? Sarah has already, and Susan. Well, it's a refresher for both of you then. And I think I read this about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's probably one of the first kind of books that I read around positive psychology and just happiness and in general. And I think it's probably a good book to kind of review at the moment as well. The guy Shawn Achor, interesting character. I'll talk a little bit about him and how he, I suppose, stumbled into this area. And as I said, I'll be quite informal. The first time I did a book review, I had some slides. I think we were in our early stages then, a bit more structured. I don't have slides this time. I have lots of little post-its in here that I'll probably pluck at as we go through. But I'll just give you a bit of background about Shawn first anyway. He's a lecturer on happiness and a best-selling author of a number of books. And he offers clear principles for improving your state of mind, career path, health, relationships, and other areas around positive psychology. And in this book, he comes up with 7 principles that fuel success and performance at work. And ultimately, he, I guess, focuses in around tools that can develop your happiness, and by developing happiness you can become more grateful and become more optimistic as well. One of the first things that I kind of mention, you might have heard of Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. Has anyone ever heard of him before? Sarah, you must have. If you've read the book, you definitely did. So he effectively was the mentor for Shawn, and Tal Ben-Shahar, he is a Harvard lecturer, and he created a program in Harvard on happiness, and I think it was back in the early 2000s, and it quickly became the most attended lecture in Harvard for the first year students, and it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, and Shawn Achor was actually one of his students in the first year or two of that program. So that's kind of where he kind of got more and more focused into this area. And I'll just read a little bit of the introduction to give you a flavour of what it's about. So, if you observe people around you, you'll find most individuals follow a formula that has been subtle or not so subtly taught to them by their schools, their companies, their parents, or society. That is, if you work hard, you will become successful, and once you become successful, then you'll be happy. The pattern of belief explains what most often motivates us in life. We think, if I get that raise, or if I hit that next sales target, I'll be happy. If I can just get that next good grade, I'll be happy. If I can lose those pounds after Christmas, I'll be happy, and so on. Success first, happiness second. The only problem is this formula is broken. And he goes on to say, if success causes happiness, then every employee who gets a promotion, every student who would receive an acceptance letter, everyone who has accomplished a goal of any type would be happy. But with each victory, our goalposts of success keep being pushed further and further out, so that happiness gets pushed over the horizon. And I remember when I read this at the time, I probably was, doing a bit of self-reflecting and soul-searching. And when I did read the whole book back in those days, it gave me new ideas and new concepts around happiness that I would say in the last 7 or 8 years, they've popped up in many different areas, many different books, many different conversations I've had. So I'd say this was one of the earlier stages, but it definitely hits on a lot of really powerful ideas. So that's just the intro. There's 7 principles that he comes up with, and I'll touch on each of them in a little bit of detail, but just to kind of call them out at the start. The first one is called the happiness advantage. And because positive brains have a biological advantage over brains that are neutral or negative, this principle teaches us how to retrain our brains to capitalize on positivity and improve our productivity and performance. So that's kind of the first principle. The second is called the fulcrum and the lever, and how we experience the world and our ability to succeed within it constantly changes based on our mindset. So this principle focuses on how we can adjust our mindset, which he calls the fulcrum, in a way that gives us power, which is the lever, to be more fulfilled and successful. The third effect is called the Tetris effect. And when our brains get stuck in a pattern that focuses on stress, negativity, failure, we set ourselves up for failure. This principle teaches us how to retrain our brains to spot patterns of possibility so that we can seize opportunity whenever and wherever we look. The fifth principle, called failing upwards, and in this one, in the midst of defeat, stress, crisis, our brains map different paths to help us cope. This principle is about finding the mental path not only that leads us up and out of failure, but teaches us to be happier and more successful because of it. The sixth principle is called the Zorro Circle, and when challenges loom and we get overwhelmed, our rational brains can get hijacked by emotions. This principle teaches us how to regain control by focusing first on small, manageable goals and then gradually expanding our circle to achieve bigger and bigger ones. That was the fifth, actually. The sixth is called the 20-second rule. And with this one, sustaining lasting change often feels impossible because our willpower is limited. And when willpower fails, we fall back on our old habits and succumb to the path of least resistance. This principle shows how by making small energy adjustments, we can reroute the path of least resistance and replace bad habits with good ones. And the final one, just to touch on, is called social investment. And in the midst of challenges and stresses, some people choose to hunker down and retreat within themselves, but the most successful people invest their time in their friends, peers and family members to propel them forward. This principle teaches us how to invest more of that time in the greatest predictors of success and excellence, which is our social support network. So that kind of at the high level gives the seven principles. And what I'll do is kind of flick through some of the things that I've caught out here that I thought was interesting as I go through the different principles. This one, just as a prelude, is called Change is Possible. And has anyone read about the fact that the London taxi drivers and their brain structure? You're probably familiar around how they've learned the map of London because it's not well developed, and it developed their I think it's their neocortex or certain parts of the thickening of the brain through repetitive actions. Marianne, or a few of you are nodding on that.
I haven't read, but it was referenced as a study a few times in the programs on the BBC I watched. Fascinating, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this book was probably the first time I read that, but actually they give a different example, and it's called this a behavioural riddle. You were in a cage behind bars. The bars are made of titanium and your cage is empty. To survive, you must consume 240 tiny pellets of food every hour. The pellets are provided to you, but unfortunately are located in small holes outside of your cage. so that the process of reaching through the bars and actually grabbing a pellet initially takes you 30 seconds per pellet. If you can't complete the task faster, you'll only consume half the amount of the nutrition you need and you'll eventually starve. What do you do? And has anyone heard that one before? No. So again, this is actually the answer: expand part of your brain in charge of this task so you can become faster at retrieving the pellets. And this actually touches on the neuroscience about that. This was an experiment done with not humans but squirrel monkeys, and they said after 500 tries the monkeys had become so adept at retrieving the pellets, even as the size of the hole continually decreased. They were able to speed up so fast that they were able to get as many pellets as they needed. And while they were doing that, the researchers used strategically placed electrodes. They were able to establish the areas of the brain that showed the activity where the monkey was first faced with this conundrum. And as they tracked the brain function over and over as the monkey retrieved the pellets, they could see that the actual part of the brain that was doing that had actually literally expanded from the section necessary to complete and accomplish the task. And over, it could see that even in that short space of time, by those repetitive tasks, that change was possible. And that kind of ties into that whole area of neuroplasticity and what, fires together, wires together, and the more and more you do anything, it's possible. So the key message he's trying to get across and that is that, change can happen if you put your intention on it, if you put the effort in and you look to do it over and over as a repetitive task. So I thought that was interesting. The happiness advantage, which is the first principle, I'll just go into a little bit more detail on that one then. Aker explains that psychologists traditionally concluded that successful people were happy because of their success. In fact, happiness is a precursor to the success that I mentioned already. And he gave advice that if you are a developing leader, you may want to heed the advice that a manager can buoy or deflate a team with comments or non-verbal communication. A positive comment from your boss can make an important presentation, a positive comment from your boss before you make an important presentation can counteract your stress, but your boss's mention of the presentation's importance could increase your stress and have a negative effect on the outcome. So the key point is that positive, supported comments prepare people to excel. And another example was a manager who believes that monitoring his staff or her staff members is necessary to ensure that they do their work creates a group with little job satisfaction. A manager who believes his or her employees are self-motivated, the author insists, can build a team that works with passion. In the effort to create a successful team, Aker suggests that managers should make 3 positive statements to counteract every negative one. To help your staff reach that highest level, the author prescribes a ratio of 6 positive statements to every 1 negative statement. And you may have heard that kind of ratios before. I think I read a book called Flourishing, I think with Maureen Gaffney a while back, and in that she talks about, I think it's a 5-to-1 ratio as well. So,
I've heard of similar in hotel industry. If you really dissatisfy the customer, you need to compensate it 7 times more, wherever the satisfaction was.
Yeah, and we always remember that 1 negative comment we get. Even if we get 10 positive ones from a piece of feedback or some sort of survey and whatnot. So that's the kind of first detail around the happiness advantage principle. Accentuate the positives, certainly give as much praise as you can. And again, this is all steeped in the kind of positive psychology work that Tal had been that the Aker had worked with the lecturer in Harvard. There was an interesting thing in it called the undoing effect, and I know we like sharing these kind of effects. Has anyone heard of the undoing effect? Okay, so I'll read a bit of an example on this to try and explain it. So And he gives lots of kind of stories. So he says, Brian, a salesman from Des Moines, was already feeling nervous about his upcoming presentation when he heard a knock on his office door. Big meeting at 4, the boss reminded him, are you ready? This is huge. We need this account. Don't mess it up, buddy. As his boss proceeded down the hall, Brian felt the stress coursing through his body. So again, this probably ties into the example I mentioned earlier. Even though he already had the presentation down pat, he was so nervous that he spent the next few hours going over it again and again, trying to anticipate where he might make a mistake and reminding himself how terrible it would be for his company to lose this account. Little did Brian know that the more he focused his mind on the potentially disastrous effects of a bad presentation, the more he doomed himself to failure. While it may seem counterintuitive for many hardened businessmen, we now know that the best thing Brian could have done in a situation is find a quick jolt of happiness. Why does this work? Because in addition to broadening our intellectual and creative capabilities, positive emotions can also provide a swift antidote to physical stress and anxiety, what psychologists call the undoing effect. In one experiment, subjects were asked to make a difficult time-pressured speech when they were told they would be videotaped and evaluated by their peers. As you might imagine, this induced considerable anxiety and measurable increases in heart and blood rate, just how Brian felt before his presentation. The researchers then randomly assigned the participants to view one of 4 different videos. 2 induced feelings of joy and contentment, 1 was neutral, and the 4th was sad. Indeed, the people primed for positive feelings experienced a faster recovery from the stress and physical effects. And not only had the happy films made them feel better, but they had undone the psychological effects of stress as well. So that's the undoing effect. And it's quite interesting how relevant that certainly can be. So that was the first one, and let me get to principle number 2, which is called the fulcrum and the lever. And in this one, so I'll kind of give you a high-level cliff note of this one as well. Aker concedes that the levels of happiness vary for each person, but he assures you that you can improve yours. Your mindset is the fulcrum of your attitude and worldview. And the author recommends changing your toolkit to shift your emotional pivot point and boost your strength. To increase your happiness, he asks you to consider these points, and these are kind of more the how-tos. Consistently spend 5 minutes a day focusing on your breath can positively affect your health and outlook. So I think that's scientifically proven a lot over the last while. To increase your happiness, make a point 1 day a week of doing 5 things for other people. So pick a day and do 5 things for other people. Look at photos of loved ones in your office. Can give you a jolt of happiness. So can going outdoors for 20 minutes. So exercising is important. Exercise has a lasting beneficial impact on your mood. Spending money on experiences like concerts or on other people, such as hosting a group dinner, provides long-lasting positive effects over more tangible, I suppose, items. And using your best skills or a signature strength buoys your mood. So if you enjoy learning, visit a museum or take in some new information each day, or attend a book club perhaps as well. That can buoy your mood. Aker cites the Greek alchemist Archimedes, or scientist Archimedes, who believed that given the right lever and fulcrum, he could move the world. Your lever is your belief in your own abilities, and the fulcrum is your belief in your ability to change. Whether your goal is to climb up the corporate ranks or sifting through or academic ones, shifting your fulcrum or your mindset in a positive direction and expanding the lever of possibility will help you succeed. He goes on to talk about your relative perception forms your reality at work and during your leisure time. If you view such time as unproductive, Aker warns, you won't generate the energy that you'll need to bring a positive mindset to having dinner with your friends or family. Viewing your time off as a way to connect with people will improve your productivity. And I think that kind of gives you that idea that so much of, I guess, what this talks about and what we've talked about in some of the other book clubs is having a growth mindset, having a positive mindset, constantly feeding that, and knowing that you can do it, probably back to the point earlier about that change is absolutely possible. I'm just seeing if I had any other good examples that popped out during that. Anyone have any comments on that? Any questions or anything come up as we were kind of thinking through the fulcrum and the lever? Makes sense?
Makes sense.
I had one other example kind of tagged here called the Pygmalion effect. Have you heard of that before? I might be butchering the pronunciation. Okay, let me give you this one a little bit read. So according to the Roman poet Ovid, the sculptor Pygmalion could look at a piece of marble and see the sculpture trapped inside of it. In particular, Pygmalion had a vision of this idea, the zenith of all of his hopes and desires, a woman he named Galatea. One day he began to chisel the marble, crafting it in his vision, and when he was finished, he stepped back and looked at its work. It was beautiful. Galatea was more than just a woman. The statue represented every hope, dream, every possibility, every meaning, beauty itself. Inevitably, Pygmalion fell in love. Now, he was no fool. He was not in love with a stone woman. He was in love with the possibility of this idea coming to life. So he asked the goddess of love, Venus, if she could grant him one wish and make this a reality. And so she did, at least according to the myth, obviously. So I think that the message there is that, what you put your mind to, what you can believe in, will, if you put everything into it, has a greater chance of happening than if you have negative thoughts around it or just have a lack of belief in it. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting as well. Okay, that's two. So the next one is the Tetris effect. Does anyone know what the Tetris effect is? Does anyone have an idea? Yeah, I think I'll explain it. But so Aker recognizes that getting stuck on certain ideas or emotions is easy, but staying aware of your obsessions can help you get unstuck. So if you play Tetris for hours, when you look up from the screen, your brain will still fit shapes into spaces effectively. And I think there's research, I know there's research because it says it here, that shows that people, when Tetris came out, I suppose first, and they were playing for hours and hours a day, that their vision and view had been so distorted that when they got into normal day-to-day life, they can start seeing shapes. And the one example that I can always remember, I think one of my first jobs when I was youngish, I was working in Tesco's, or it was Quinsworth at the time, and if anyone has packed shelves for hours and hours every day, I remember at night like dreaming of packing shelves. So there was probably an element of Tetris going on in my head at that point. But the Tetris effect, I suppose, can work, from a positive perspective as well. So he goes on to say, lawyers can find the flaw in an argument just as easily as other auditors can find tax mistakes, but they're targeting errors, which, as Aker explains, can cause inattentional blindness and make you less able to see the positive. This happens when you focus so much on one aspect of a situation that your brain does not pay attention to anything else. For example, when you buy a blue Prius, the example here, you start seeing blue Priuses everywhere. And I actually did a post on that. It's called the Baader-Meinhof principle or syndrome, if you've ever heard of like if you see a red car or whatever you've never seen before and you're aware of it, it becomes very aware to you then. So that example, it's not that it's not always been there. It's just now your brain gives a priority when you focus. So that's why it is important, the author instructs, to teach your brain to focus on the positive. The more you can do this, Aker writes, the more positive and gratitude you will feel. And that will benefit your work and productivity. The happiness you will feel will create more optimism and higher expectations of similar outcomes in the future. To focus on the positive, Aker proposes that you take 5 minutes each day to write down a list of the 3 good things that happened that day. And I suppose that's one of the key recommendations if you want to develop a sense of gratitude now. But I guess 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, it may not have been as commonly known. You can include something like an interaction with a friend or a colleague. Carrying out this exercise teaches your brain to focus on gratitude and moments of happiness. Brain change, once thought impossible, is now a well-known fact, the author writes, supported by some of the most rigorous and cutting-edge neuroscience. Consistency is important in establishing a positive frame of mind. Sharing your 3 good things with your spouse or family leads to seeing more positive elements in those relationships. This doesn't mean blocking out major problems. Rather, it calls for prioritizing the positives. So just even on that, do people have developed and believe in practicing gratitude, and do you notice the massive positives of it?
Yes, it's very, very powerful. A couple of years ago, when I dived into psychology of our brain and how important it is to train your brain to pay attention on the positive things, and I learned it from the perspective of how can I help my children. We started just to do simple exercise, bringing them to bed. We would just talk about one thing that they are grateful that particular day. And to teach them, I had to start with myself. I'm really grateful for that simple thing, for example, walk we had. And because we just took it as a very simple step, very small step, only one thing, and you just say it, and then they would say it. We developed the habit, so it's real habit that we do every evening. And I've noticed myself that I actually became so much happier. Doesn't matter how many problems you have in a day, you sort of realize that we're so fortunate in this developed world with the house we live with, the food we have, and so on. Yeah, that's my take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only thing I would add, I know I might have mentioned on this before, that the book Time to Think by Nancy Klein, I probably did mention her a number of times, but a tool I took out of that was creating a gratitude round table at the start of a meeting, where you would, in your team, call out on somebody that has done something for you in the last week that helped you be productive or more successful. And then that person would likewise return the favor to somebody else, and you kind of go round in the circle. And I've gone into meetings that were, planned out, and I knew there was a lot of tension in the air beforehand, and used that tactic very well. That changes the mood, and everybody's in a much more positive mindset. Even that simple roundtable gratitude works really well, and more organizations and leaders are adopting it, which is good.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Was there anything else in the Tetris effect? So I think the key message there is, what you focus on, you can certainly get back. And again, as I kind of scan through it, it is emphasizing the practice element here. As a very important aspect of that principle. So principle number 4 is called failing up. Reinterpreting your initial reaction to a crisis can help you overcome or surmount it, and that is certainly no more truer than now. So in the book, I think it was about 2013 or 14. So what was fresh in the mind for Aker around the time was the 2008 financial crisis, and he talks about a lot of the presentations he gives to organizations and leaders around that time. That certainly we're going through a lot of turmoil and a lot of redundancies, and as a result, they definitely needed to focus on happiness. So he talks about when something devastating like the 2008 financial crisis occurs, people go into one of 3 mental directions, and probably the same now. You might remain stuck in the negative present, or you might exacerbate the situation by envisaging the worst future consequences, or probably another term would be kind of catastrophizing there, or going down the negative rabbit hole. Or the third one, you can use the crisis to catapult yourself into a better place. If you can see the opportunities that the problems create, you'll be able to make those opportunities a reality and use the issue to help you move forward, and move, I suppose, into an opportunity where you can potentially thrive through that negative situation that you're in. And I know from the work I do, we talk about resilience a lot, and resilience is very much in my definition of it is surviving and being able to bounce back, but bring you back to where you were beforehand. And what I take a lot from this is that through those disruptions or disasters or crises, you can actually not only just bounce back to that level, but move forward. And there's a term, I don't know if anyone have heard of it, called anti-fragility, where you're actually it's the antithesis of being fragile. So you're actually thriving through times of disaster. And you can talk about anti-fragility from an individual perspective, from a leader, from a culture, from an organization, from a business model, from a strategy perspective. You can dive into it. There's there's a couple of books on it. I can't remember off the top of my head his similar sounding name to Tal Shahar. I think it's Nassim is the guy's name, about anti-fragility. He also wrote the book The Black Swan. You can check him out, but I absolutely believe in that part of what he's talking about here. And just to give you one other example that I kind of picked out here, he talks about ways that you can approach, this moving from that maybe spiraling downwards or being stuck in the moment to looking upwards. And if you've done kind of cognitive behavioral therapy and those sort of tools, there's a model called the ABCD model of interpretation, which focuses on adversity for the A, belief, consequence, and disputation. And in that, adversity is the event that we can't change. It is what it is. Belief is our reaction to the event, why we thought it happened, and what we think it means for the future. Is it a problem that is only temporary and local in nature, or do we think it is permanent and pervasive? Are there ready solutions, or do we think it is unsolvable? If we believe the former, that is, if we see the adversity as short-term or as an opportunity for growth or appropriately confined to the only part of our life, then we maximize the chance of a positive consequence. But if the belief has led us down a more pessimistic path, helplessness and inaction can bring negative consequences. That's when it's time to put the D to work. And the D on disputation involves first telling ourselves that our belief is just that, a belief, not fact, and then challenging or disputing it. Psychologists recommend that we externalize this voice so that it's like we're actually arguing with the other person. And what is the evidence of this belief? Is it all right? Effectively, you're challenging that belief. And finally, if the adversity is truly as bad, is it as bad as we first thought? This particular method is called decatastrophizing, taking time to show ourselves that while the adversity is real, it is potentially not as bad or catastrophic as we had made out it to be in the end. So people familiar with that ABCD model, have you heard of it before? I think there's an ABCDE model as well. There's another letter that kind of further enhances it.
ABCD, that's the one I'm very much familiar. I'm on the psychology course by the leader in the industry. She's massive YouTube following, Julia Christina. And this model ABCBO is very powerful, especially if it's practiced regularly. As everything, it has potential to rewire your brain, and it's exactly what you said, Rob. It's essentially you're becoming aware that certain triggers cause certain emotion, and this emotion is triggered by your thoughts, and thoughts, they're just thoughts. If you aware of those thoughts and you know that they will pass and you substitute them with the better thoughts, essentially you won't have the negative emotions that some of us been absorbing and carrying. And very powerful model.
Mm-hmm. The key thing, as you said, though, is to practice it. But I think a lot of the times, until you almost need to have it beside you all day, every day, so that when those incidents, happen, whatever big or small they are, that you have a trigger to get your brain to use this.
Exactly, Rob. I'm actually, it's in my notes, sitting with the examples, so I can open, because I only recently started to practice understanding how important it is, and it's in personal settings, it's in business settings, it's on the complex projects where we know how many of them go wrong and why they go wrong. I'm a big fan of it. I was introduced to it recently, and I think after practicing for a month, I already see the results just from the awareness, more than anything, and understanding the workings of the brain and the ability to change it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty powerful and easy to remember when you know your ABCD anyway. So cool. So I'll keep going. The next one is called the Zorro effect, which is principle number 5. And when life overwhelms you, start with manageable tasks. And this one certainly falls into kind of a lot of stuff I would advocate of, kind of small bite-sized efforts and kind of 1% better in ways. Aker cites Zorro, the famed swordsman of all people. In his narrative, Zorro had a mentor who trained him in one new skill at a time. Until Zorro mastered each one, he couldn't move forward. So when you seek to change your life, the author recommends taking small steps. If the amount of work is facing you is overwhelming, he advises you to identify small tasks that you can control and expand from there. And, with any kind of project management mindset, it's kind of chunking things up into smaller tasks. Certainly is a good idea. For example, Aker cites a senior executive who returned from work on a big project to find 1,400 emails in his inbox. Sounds familiar. A consultant recommended dealing with only the newest emails for several days. This gave the executive a sense of control over his environment, and he was able to clear out the remainder of this backlog within a reasonable amount of time. Returning to this main theme, Aker suggests that your mindset and beliefs determine the level of control, the control you feel you have. And this is where he talks about the internal locus of control, an internal versus an external locus of control, and something definitely talked about on this, I think, in the past, where you have that sense of from an internal perspective, no matter what happens, you have a control and can control how you react to it. Whereas with those with the external locus of control, effectively you're blaming everybody else for whatever happens to you. And you can think of, world leaders that are pretty good at being external locus of control. As an example, Aker offers a woman who won awards for her work but believed that she was merely lucky, thereby dismissing the opportunity to truly feel satisfaction about her work. Aker understands that everybody can fall prey to having an external locus in stressful situations. If you find yourself overwhelmed, first express your feelings by writing them down or talking with somebody. Being self-aware, you can then determine what is in your control and what isn't. So, like everything starts with self-awareness, has a big foundational element. The way to move forward, the author says, is to release the issues you don't control and look for the areas that you can change. Defining a smaller, even still somewhat challenging place to begin with gives you confidence in yourself to expand your efforts. Setting realistic goals. The most successful people, the author writes, are the ones that can capitalize on the positive and reap rewards at every turn. So yeah, I think it's a clear enough message. The Zorro Circle is a good way of remembering it as well. Like a lot of these books, for every principle or for every action or set of steps, there's always an acronym or a kind of hook to make you remember. But the key messages, as we see in a lot of them, is similar, right? Like there's probably repeating examples there. So 2 to go, and the principle 6 is around what he calls the 20-second rule, and willpower alone is insufficient to change a habit. And I thought this one was kind of interesting enough as well. He advocates rationing your energy so you can stay inspired, increasing your success by limiting your options and defining what you plan to do the night before you want to do it. The less energy you expend to make a change, the more successful you will be. Eating well, exercising, getting a good night's sleep are also beneficial. And knowing that this doesn't make those things easier to do, the author understands. Good habits are difficult to establish and maintain, but you can develop them the same way as you can learn skills. Creating a habit requires the brain time to encode it. And I think in here he talks about Kahneman's work and the kind of, the brain, how lazy our brains are, and it tries to conserve energy at every opportunity. So when we try to take on something new, and I was actually writing a bit about it today, this concept of brain fog. Have you heard of brain fog? Yeah. Where our cognitive load and the amount of information we can take in is limited. And I think a lot of people have been suffering from brain fog as a result of having to work from home, and everything that has come up as a result of the pandemic has made so many new activities and interactions happen on a day-to-day basis. Our cognitive load has been overloaded much quicker, and as a result it has this impact of causing that idea and concept of brain fog, because what we were maybe used to and doing certain things on autopilot in the past allowed us to keep that buffer of space in our brain to deal with those new things that came at us. Whereas now there's so many new things coming at us, or have been. It had a consequence of depleting the energy or filling up that buffer much quicker, and as a result making us feel a little bit more foggy in the brain. But I kind of digress onto what the 20-second rule is about here. But basically his example, or the reason he called it the 20-second rule, effectively is by putting kind of something in the way that would add, I suppose, 20 seconds to something that would take him 20 seconds to do something. He tried to remove that 20-second challenge so that he could do something immediately. The example I think he talks about is playing guitar. So redirecting the path to 20-second rule, he says, in allowing himself to be swept along this path, the example he's talking about, this guy Ted had become ensnared in a series of very bad habits. In his case, these all involved procrastination, which got me thinking, could the psychological mechanism that we were derailing Ted's productivity also explain why I had failed my regime of guitar playing? Had the path to least resistance led me astray? I thought back to the initial experiment. I had kept my guitar tucked away in the closet, out of sight and out of reach. It wasn't far out of the way, of course. My apartment isn't that big. Just about 20 seconds of extra effort it took me to walk to the closet and pull it out. And that proved enough of a deterrent to prevent me from practicing. So I had tried to overcome this barrier with willpower, but after only 4 days, my reserves were completely drained. And that's kind of the link of willpower and the amount of buffer in your brain. If I couldn't use self-control to ingrain the habit, at least not for an extended period, I now wondered, what if I could eliminate the amount of activation energy it took to get started? Clearly, it was time for another experiment. I took the guitar out, bought a $2 guitar stand, set it in the middle of my living room, and although nothing had changed except the now, instead of being 20 seconds, the way the guitar was immediate, 3 weeks later I had looked up a habit grid with 21 proud check marks against it. So just by eliminating the 20 seconds, he was able to be a bit more productive.
I think James Clear in Atomic Habits uses the exact same example of the guitar in the middle of the floor.
James Clear sounds like he stole a lot of examples from a lot of these guys.
I'm thinking so. Yeah.
That's why I've never bought into James Clear.
I've heard an example of the shoes, having sports shoes left in the hall. Also forces the habit to just go for the run after.
Yeah, exactly. I normally leave the shoes literally looking at me at the door when I'm challenged mentally not to do it. But again, a nice little example to give it. And then the final one, which Which is one, as I was kind of reading about it again, is that it's one, probably the biggest challenge we face at the moment is that social connection and social investment. And when in crisis, move towards people, not away from them. So in the best and worst of times, nurture and maintain a circle of supportive friends. When a crisis occurs, people need to pull together. ACRE reports that successful people embrace their social networks during times of difficulty. Studies have found that the happiest 10% of people worldwide have strong social networks. Having a strong or weak social network can affect your lifespan as much as smoking, high blood pressure, or exercise. Short interactions with other people while passing in the hallway or the virtual hallway, for example, can reduce stress levels. I think that's, if you think about the brain, I think that's serotonin and oxytocin and all of those things that are released or triggered. A strong positive relationship between you and your boss, ACRE underscores, is more beneficial for your company and healthier for you. And I've read research on that. I think that emotional connection or relationship with your boss is the most important well-being factor for people that are in employment, more so than financial, more so than health, and I think even emotional. So that psychological safety element is extremely important. And I think I'll just finish on this one example, if there was one still here. I know there was an example in this where I think it's like a 70-year study where they had tracked people from the 1930s. You're probably familiar. A couple of.
It was about the TED Talk. Was it the TED Talk in Cambridge? They did experiment what truly makes people happy?
Right.
Yeah.
It could have been. Yeah, I think he talked about just the details of that study, and they ultimately just came back to those that were tracked over the 70 years. Those that were considered happiest were the ones that had the best social connections and that had most love in their life, I guess. There's
a very good TED Talk. If you search what truly makes people happy, and one of the most watched ones actually. And the gentleman from England, from Cambridge, I think he gives actually accounts of the study.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And I think, let me see, is there anything else I missed? Just the last section was, while independently effective, each happiness building process is stronger when you embrace two or more of those together. So it's a combination of the seven, or which ones can you do on a day or a weekly or a monthly basis. And they're very practical. They're very easy, I think, to do. You could probably do all seven in one day in some instances. Solid social networks can even help you overcome inertia when you're starting a new habit. Happiness is not the belief that we don't need to change, the author writes, it's the realization that we can. So that's the happiness advantage. Hopefully you got something out of it and made you feel a little bit happier as well, perhaps. I'm happy now it's over, as always, because I don't feel as much prepared as I should have been. But anything anyone else got from that, or questions, or other books that you've read around the topic?
Not so much a book I've read, but many years ago I did quite a lot of self-actualization courses. And the theory, I suppose, or something I've taken away from that and still use, is about emotion and decision and how they're separate. If you sit and wait till you're ready to make that decision, or you're emotionally confident enough to take that step, you could wait forever. You have to make the decision. And I suppose what combines that is, you act it. You pretend it, and then it becomes second nature, and then you become more confident in that way. One of the roles I've just I retired from most recently was I was a funeral celebrant, and that at times was extremely difficult, and I really had to resort what I've just talked about, and really, make myself get up on that podium and really, sort of go, because you can't make a mistake with a funeral. There is no, you can't do it tomorrow. You can't say to everybody, I got that wrong, so, but this whole notion of, yes, you make the decision and then everything follows, I think has helped me a lot.
Yeah, I relate a lot to what you just said, Mary. And the decision is the act, taking an act on it is actually making you realize that you can do it, and then you can improve each time. Versus if we sit and wait for that, when I'm gonna feel like it, we're never gonna feel like it. We just have to jump into it, and that's why the kind of agile project management mindset is what really works. That you just start doing it if you're dealing with uncertainty, and you adjust as you go along, because while you're doing it, you learn constantly as a team, and you improve. So it's very, very powerful, and fair play to you.
Yeah, I think
well, something that people struggle with, they fear making a decision. They have to take responsibility for it. They have to stand over it. And if it all falls apart, they're answerable to it, regardless of whether it's to themselves and work, to their colleagues, to their relatives, anything like that. And they struggle with that. Step forward, make a decision, follow through, and let's capture our lessons learned at the end. It's a massive thing. And it's something that I suppose I do a lot at work, is just pushing people to, let's just do this. Let's just make this decision. Let's just see how it turns out. It's probably not going to be that bad.
It actually always feels better, even if it doesn't work, right? You just kind of get a boost of adrenaline and, dopamine, and all of these things happen when you take that step forward. Yeah. And sometimes it works, it doesn't, you learn from it, but you're empowered by doing it. So
yeah. But what is important, that the fear that the people have a culture developed by the leaders that they feel they can do it. Anyone read and know about Brené Brown, Dare to Lead? An extremely powerful book. I so much respect her. I think we just have these tectonic shifts that are starting to happen. It just can't go on any longer when people are paralyzed by the fear of going and taking that leap and really proposing something, especially the introverts, and you're trying to make the change happen, and there's this silence because they're just afraid. They're afraid that their boss is going to say that, what you're coming up with. I know it's the whole different digression now, but just what you said, Jennifer, it prompted me to say that being brave really depends on what culture you have in your company, what culture's leaders build.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, and it's down to the person, down to the situation that they're in, down to if I take myself for example, people that I went to school with don't remember me. They don't recognize me if back when you could stop and say hello to somebody on the street. Because I was a complete introvert. I was a total wallflower. So what I did is I faked being an extrovert until I got a little bit more confident about it. Because I knew that I wasn't going to progress. Well, I came to a realization that I wasn't going to get very far in life if I didn't get over myself and just drop the fear and just get on with it. I'm still terrified of talking to people, but...
You shouldn't be. You're so great at it.
You're doing a good job there anyway. Yeah.
It reminds me. Sorry, Declan. Did you want to go ahead? Okay. I was just going to say it brings me to a book that may or may not have been covered here, Black Box Thinking, and it was about that whole idea that when we make any decision and there's a mistake, that actually it's there that we can get so much information. And that's why I was so interested in that piece about Tetris, because even in a lot of the error situations, particularly in medical legal situations, it's actually when the problem becomes so urgent and so significant that all other possible solutions become impossible to access. And they cited a good few examples of this. And it's the same thing you're talking about. When we put our attention too much on the problem, we stop seeing anything else. And equally, its inverse is true. And I thought that was really good. So yeah, across a lot of different, I suppose, ways, not just about habits, but also about good decision making and also good learning.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I reckon that's prime candidate for the next book club. I'd say that's
there's a couple of
Is it
there.
not? Have you not done done it recently? Okay. It's a great book.
That's a great one, yeah. I'd love you to do that, Aisling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Just depends on the date.
2 weeks from tonight, you're locked in.
Okay.
Bob, is there anything said in that book around like negative emotions? There's a lot of pushback at the moment around like almost the social pressure to be happy, be productive, be happy. This term toxic positivity, and just understanding. Yeah, absolutely. There's some lovely little nudges in there about like how to boost yourself, but then also allowing a space for negative emotions, which are also effective and are good for us. So, does it mention anything about that in the book?
Not. There's a couple of examples where he's talking about giving. I think he was giving a presentation in Wall Street on the book, right? And he said one guy in the room put his hand up and he said, this is all kind of mumbo jumbo, and he was like the real, and your man Aker said like. It was one of the first times he was presenting on it, and he said he just felt himself falling through the floor with how am I going to respond to this? And he just cited some examples and took it on board and continued with the lecture. And he said at the end of the 3-hour session, he was having lunch and a couple of the analysts sat with him and they just mentioned, that guy that asked the question, he's the most toxic person that we have to work with. And he just kind of cited that those that tended to bring it up were the ones that. He actually said it was, isn't this all common sense? And he said, yeah, absolutely, it's common sense, but it's not common action. That your man was very, and it tends to be maybe those that push back. I'm not saying that that's a blanket statement. I'm just saying that some people that would be a very almost aggressively against a lot of this is because they're afraid of it in many ways or reluctant to buy into it, and potentially they're the ones that might need it the most. But to be fair, I think he was going so far in on happiness in this because it was one of the first probably mainstream bestsellers around the topic that he probably didn't. He probably over-indexed on happiness and didn't maybe balance it out as much. I'd say there's more now, though. There's always a backlash to things, right, Ek? And I'd say that's probably what's happening now is this kind of bit of a backlash and toxic positivity or whatever as you called it. Is there's a counterbalance coming in maybe.
Declan, before we came on there, I literally was just reading, so I subscribed to positivepsychology.com, and the title was The Upside of Defensive Pessimism, the Potential Benefit of Anxiety. Right. So it was exactly that, and it was like sometimes that people use pessimism in order to help them move forward, to actually get through and to do something, and that as long as it's not self-sabotaging, it's actually okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be feeling happy about doing the presentation or whatever. You can be really, this isn't going to go well for me, but I'll do it. And then, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's kind of to your point.
That's right. I have to say it. I am an absolute big believer in gratitude and happiness. I'm not one of those people who pushing back. But yeah, I just think there's always a thing about balancing the two. And you can be really excited and that'll motivate you for a presentation. But you can also use fear in a sort of a real positive way of getting yourself up for the big presentation. So, all it is framing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because sometimes you feel this pressure to be happy and then you feel even worse that you're not feeling happy and and you're a mess.
And toxic positivity is really bad for us. So you've got to start off being real and accepting reality. And obviously that's so important with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. Like you have to start off being real and authentic. And then from there, maybe moving to, right, what can I focus on that is good? I know Sean wrote that book. It was a number of years ago, Rob, I think. And there's they're calling it now third wave positive psychology. So in third wave, it is a lot more accepting of negative emotions and, you know, being authentic, and that being really important as a baseline. And then from there, using all of this stuff that's still really relevant. It's just you shouldn't deny the reality or deny the feelings.
There's a book, Emotional Agility by Susan David. Has anyone ever read that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good book.
Very good. She actually was in Cork. She was in Cork. We at that IFA. She was in Cork a couple of years ago when the IMI opened up down here, and she presented, and I met her afterwards and got her book, and she signed it, and I tried to get her on the podcast, but she's obviously way too high profile for that. But she, in the book, she talks about exactly that as well, about, you know, it can be dangerous to be too optimistic. You know, if you think everything is going to go your way, that can actually backfire on you, and you develop blind spots almost then to what reality is. So it is kind of to that point, like everything, there's a balance, there's an in between, there's a mindset of keeping both kind of poles in play. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a different element of that, and I'm not sure if it fits, but I'm kind of curious because it's something I'm kind of working on at the moment. When lockdown started, you know, we were working really hard on, you know, everybody'd gone home, people were stressed, they were fearful, you know, it's a new situation. And I was working really hard on being upbeat and positive in every meeting that I went to, and nothing's a problem and everything can be solved and it's all fine and, you know, all the rest of it. And I think about 6 months in, well, maybe less, I landed into another Zoom meeting. Hi, everybody, how's it going? How are you all doing? And all the rest of it. And somebody said, I'm so glad you're here. I always look forward to you joining a meeting. You're so upbeat and positive, and it just gets me through the day. It bottomed me out completely. I was like, I can't. Like, I realized I'd been giving all of my positivity to every meeting, trying to keep people going. And I'd absolutely nothing left at the end of it. So I found that was... I don't know how it fits, and I'm still trying to define it. But I ended up finding it quite a toxic situation then, because everybody was sitting around waiting for me to bring the positivity, and nobody else was, you know. So still working on pulling people out of themselves and trying to get them to, you know. So that the exercise around, I took note of the exercise that you mentioned, Rob, just around asking people to mention something positive about somebody else. I'm thinking that's something that I might start bringing into meetings, just to try and
empower them to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Now I have pulled back. Because I need a little something left for myself at the end of the day. You know, otherwise I'd fall apart. But it was quite an interesting moment to realize that people were relying on just one person to bring the positivity, you know, whereas I think people need to be relying on themselves, really. And I should step back and not try so hard. So like you were saying, you know, Sarah, a little bit more authenticity. I was pushing myself too hard to be positive. Still trying to define that whole space.
Really interesting. I deliver a workshop in resilience in the work that I do, and I talk about the Stockdale paradox. I'm not sure if you've heard of General Stockdale. So he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and he and many others were prisoner of war and were trying to cope under extremely challenging situations. And there was different groups of people. So you had a certain group who were extremely positive, and you had another group who were extremely negative, and then you had another group, a third group, who were what they called realistic. And the negative group died first, which I guess you might expect, but the positive group also died because they were convinced that they would be released by Christmas. And when they weren't released by Christmas, a lot of them lost hope and died. And the group that survived was the group who had what they call realistic optimism, where they went, we will be released someday, but we don't know when. And I know when COVID started, I was convinced it'd all be over by May. It started in March, by May. And I remember when I was looking at this because I started working on resilience workshops then at that point. I remember when I was putting that content together, it really spoke to me because I was like, here I am convinced in my mind this will all be over by May. Thankfully, I got over it and I started using some of what the Stockdale Paradox teaches us, which is, you know, about being realistic, but being optimistic as well. I will be released. It will all be over soon. I will come out the other side. I just don't know when, and I'm going to be okay and do what I can in the interim. And you've probably heard then the other principle that's also in Man's Search for Meaning was people who survived were the people who focused on what they could do to support other people. And that was huge for coping as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. It sounds like my own personal motto is prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Just on Declan, you said it was in 2 weeks' time, the 26th. I'm actually at one of my, I've been invited to another Toastmasters meeting, so I can't make it for that Tuesday. If it's okay, I'll certainly do it 2 weeks later if that's okay. But I'm evaluating somebody at a Toastmasters meeting on that 26th.
That's perfect. Yeah, we have them lined up for every 2 weeks from now till, I guess, it'll just keep going. So we'll put you in for the 9th of February.
Perfect. That's
Great.
Good.
Anyone would like to put their hand up for the 26th now that it came open? Don't all do it at once, obviously. So, you know. It's a safe space, guys, as you can see at this stage, you know, so. Have a think about it, I would say. You know, there's no panic. Get in touch with me or Deck, and you know, you've seen how it operates now anyway, and it'll always be raw and rough
real.
and ready, and real. Exactly.
Rob, before we finish up, if you were to give us one takeaway that you had from the entire book, just one key thing, what would you say to us? Your biggest learning?
What was my biggest learning? Like, it's more about probably reinforcing an awful lot of. I think you know, as I kind of look through it again and look at the. I think for me, I suppose that it's like the actual point I mentioned earlier. That kind of Baader-Meinhof is when you start to notice something, it becomes more and more aware, and it's reframing disruption and challenges that we're facing and looking for ways to try and see it as a potential opportunity, you know. So like this, right, we're in lockdown. I think it's the best. I know we're a horrible time, but it's a great time to do a bit more self-development, to go, you know, run every day. I have that extra hour in the day. People talk about not being able to commute, you know, being grateful that we have jobs is a good thing, but using that extra 30 minutes a day or whatever to do something totally different that can help you develop. So it's kind of failing upwards or looking for those opportunities that might be not visible in the kind of times of crisis and times of disruption. And I think, you know, his recommendations was coming out of the 2008 crisis. You know, it's true now, and I think disruption is constantly, you know, going to come our way. So it's just being, to your point about being resilient, and I think, you know, being even looking beyond that is kind of what sticks with me. All right, guys. Rob. Thank you all for coming. I hope those that joined for the first time will come back. It was great to have you all, and thanks for the interaction. And yeah, look forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks. Hey folks, thanks so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, could you please consider helping me extend the reach of the podcast that a little bit further? You can do that in a number of ways. The number one way is to subscribe on your app of choice. This helps me with the chart ranking, leading to more folks stumbling across the podcast and checking it out. You could also repost it on your social media channels. Any of them would be great. And maybe even tell a friend in person or over the phone. Pick up the phone, give them a call, and tell them about the 1% Better podcast. Tell them about this episode or one that you've heard in the past. Any will do. I would really appreciate it. In the last year, we set up a 1% Better Slack community, which you can join for free. And interact with me and other members of the community, and improve through holding each other accountable and sharing monthly challenges. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. I'm into season 4 of this incredible journey, and the more of these interviews and solo shows that I research, record and share, the better I believe that they get, and more loaded with actionable takeaways that you can learn from. I know I've learned so much from it so far, and it's always really, really fulfilling and rewarding when I hear from you on what you took from it. So do reach out, rob@robofthegreen.ie. And of everybody that listens, 90% listen and enjoy, but only around 10% actually take action, write down takeaways and put them into practice. I am convinced that if we can move that number a bit higher, the listeners will not only make steps forward towards their goals, but they will be more fulfilled and happy and better. Change doesn't happen overnight. It is hard, but it's all about taking the first step, whatever that is for you. You can absolutely do this. Make a plan, be deliberate, take action. Don't overreach. Start with those small incremental improvements, and over time you will see great progress. It's all in the pursuit of betterness. So again, thank you so much for listening. Good luck and stay safe.